I'm Mark DeJesus here, and welcome to this episode of Transformed You. If you've been tuning in to our recent episodes, you've noticed that we've been talking a lot about my book, Exposing the Rejection Mindset, and applying it in a number of different ways, using our conversation as a way to draw you in and help you to find yourself in the battle, but also take some next steps in experiencing freedom. I've really enjoyed some of the positive feedback I've been getting from people about how it has really helped illuminate areas of their life that have kept them bound in certain patterns. It's been so exciting. Well, recently I had the opportunity to do an interview on a podcast, and we had such great conversation. I asked her to share a little bit about how exposing the rejection mindset helped her in her life and her journey. And I want to give you an inside scoop into that conversation. Her name is Twaambo Kapilikisha, and I've really enjoyed the discussion we had, the dialogue, and just hearing from her heart how the message has deeply impacted her, how she's taking it to her family, to her culture, to her generations, to the world around her. And I pray that you're really blessed by it. So tune in and enjoy it. God bless you. Welcome to this broadcast. I'm so excited to be able to share with you an opportunity to talk to someone who's been very impacted by one of our resources, Exposing the Rejection Mindset, as well as some other resources as well. I've done some interviews with her on her podcast, and I'm so excited today to talk to my good friend Twaambo, and her last name is Kapilikisha. Did I do it close enough?
Right. You got it. Kapilikisha, yes.
Kapilikisha. Yeah. I've enjoyed getting to know Twaambo very much. She's got a wonderful heart and passion in helping people to experience transformative change in their own life. She is a writer, a podcaster. She's based in Berlin, Germany. Her refreshingly honest podcast, Tea Time with Twaambo, helps her audience reflect on themselves and get unstuck so they can move forward without emotional roadblocks. I love that description. I love her heart. So thank you so much, Twaambo, for taking the time to be able to talk with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. As you said, I've been looking at your work, listening to your words, the podcast you and your wife do. So much good information there for young people. Changed my life, and I'm excited to talk to you about it.
So just to let our watchers and listeners know, how old are you, so they can know where, when you say younger people, where does that fit you in the age category?
I'm not so young. I am currently 35 years old. I'm going to be 36 in a few days, actually. And but I think that everybody that's my age is still 17 in their minds. I think that happens to everybody. You kind of hit 17 and then you're the same person going on. But yeah, I'm 35.
I want to jump on that, what you just said, in just a moment. But can you tell people a little bit about where you're from originally, and also a little bit about your family?
Yeah, so I come from Zambia. It is on the southern part of Africa, right next to Zimbabwe, Malawi, Mozambique. We're a landlocked country, so I didn't grow up next to the ocean or something. Lots of animals, savannah, beautiful place. And I live here in Berlin with my husband, Marco, and our little girl. She is 15 months old, and she just started walking. So we're very, very busy parents right now.
Oh, that's fantastic. When did you move over to Germany?
I've been in Germany since 2010. But I've spent time in the U.S., for example. I went to college in the U.S. I've lived a little bit in London. I've lived a little bit in Russia. I've lived in Zambia. And now I'm in Germany. So I'm a little bit of a globetrotter. I like to travel and experience new cultures.
So you'd have to be able to speak quite a few languages to get around in a lot of those places. So how many languages can you speak, either somewhat comfortably, to get by?
Okay, so I speak English, and English is the official language in Zambia. And then I speak three local languages from Zambia, Bemba, Tonga, and Nyanja. And I speak German because I live here. I learned Russian when I was over there. I'm not so good at speaking it anymore, but I can read it pretty well. So I would say, yeah, those five.
That's fantastic. I love
Yeah.
that. So, what caused you to get into podcasting and blogging and speaking a message to encourage other people?
It started with me when I was younger. I liked to read books. I loved to write little romance novels for my friends in high school. But I come from a country where a lot of young people think that to be successful, you have to enter the top five careers: doctor, nurse, lawyer, accountant, this kind of thing. So everybody is kind of shepherded in that direction, either by your family or just from you being surrounded by everybody that wants to be a doctor or a nurse. Also because, yeah, that's what being successful is, right? I'm sure it's the same way in the US. So many young people want to go and become doctors because you can earn good money, prestige, this kind of thing. So I like to read a lot and I like to write, but I never thought that it would be something that I would do to earn money. And then fast forward to me being here in Germany. I came to Germany to study biology. And when that was done, I just one day I Googled English speaking jobs in Germany because I thought, hey, I can write. I had written on a blog for a long time and I'm good at speaking. So why don't I just give, a few things a shot? And I managed to get a job, creative writing. And now I'm doing my podcast. And I felt I have a heart for people that are my age or younger or older, fighting these emotional roadblocks because I had them myself, right? I had these recurring patterns in my life that I thought I could solve by working harder, by being kinder, this kind of thing, kind of just putting a band-aid over what the real problem was. And when I finally realized that actually I think the problems are coming from inside of me is when I started on this journey on looking into what can I do to make my inside right so that my outside could, go better. And so that's how I got into podcasting and talking to people about what I'm discovering about myself and how they can make the changes as well, which is where your podcast comes in really great because you touched a lot of subjects that help me in getting free from a lot of emotional problems.
So when you talk about how you try to move through things through staying busy and so many people fall into that and they never become aware of the deeper areas. Mm-hmm. What was it that you think set you apart in the sense that you became aware that was there some kind of trigger or some interaction with someone or some kind of, experience or awakening that helped you to go, wow, I can't just keep doing this? Was there some key component or was it a bunch of things that contributed to you awakening to the deeper need in your heart?
For me, it was going through cycles, right? You jump into a new relationship, you get a new job, and you think things are going to be different this time around, but you find yourself in the same situation a year or 2 years later. You date somebody and then your relationship ends the same way your last 5 relationships ended. You get into a job and you lose your job the same way that you lost your job 3 years ago. I was finding that I had these cycles that were, they kept happening in my life. And I finally thought, maybe the outside is not the problem. Maybe the problem is me. So it was me getting to a point where I was tired of going around in circles. And I had to stop and say, am I really doing the right thing to fix it? I was basically just tired of going around in circles and I needed to make a change. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's what happened in my life. And I think that's what it usually takes takes going around the same cycle, same problem until you finally surrender to go, I need to deal with this a different way. And I find that until we deal with the root system, start facing ourselves, facing what really is going on in our life, we never are really going to get anywhere. So you one of the things that you had mentioned to me when we began talking was you'd mentioned the resource Exposing the Rejection Mindset, which you had found had helped you a lot. What drew you to first reading the book, and tell me some of your initial experiences in receiving the content?
So I basically found you on YouTube. You go onto YouTube. YouTube is like Google now, where if you have a question, you go into YouTube and you type your question, and videos will pop up for, different content, what you're looking for. And the rejection mindset, I had been thinking about this because I was thinking about my history. So my father died when I was really young, and my mother never remarried. And I was exploring what effects does a woman not having a father figure in her life, what does that bring into her life, and how had that affected the relationships that I had been in with different men in my life. And I was also thinking about rejection, why it was so hard for me to, if a friend canceled on me, something simple like, oh, we're going to have a coffee date, and then they call last minute and they say, they're not going to make it. Why was I so wounded about that? Why could I not be a little more flippant and say, oh, hey, okay, never mind, I'll see you another time? There were some instances where I would get really upset about it, and I would think, why am I so upset about it? Or I was also people pleasing a lot, right? Because I was afraid of being rejected. So I didn't have any boundaries, and I wanted to be extra nice, and I wanted to be available all the time. And I thought this must not be normal because I was stressed about how I was living. When you people please, you are going out of your way to make everybody else happy, and you're not happy. And that was me for a long time. And I just came across your podcast, and you talked about having this book, Exposing the Rejection Mindset. And I thought, this is something that I should explore.
So when you first looked at the book, what were some things you read that maybe surprised you, that when you started looking at it, said like, wow, I didn't, think of it that way? Is there anything that you can recall when you were first looking at it that awakened in that way?
For me, it was accepting God's love, right? I had grown up as a Christian, and I think that I thought I had accepted God's love. I thought that I accepted that God loved me exactly the way I was. But I was living a performance-based Christianity, which is something that you have also talked about, right? Yeah. I was doing all of these things to make him love me a little more. And I think I internally also felt that he rejected me, right? I felt that he rejected me because I felt that my father rejected me with his death, and it was just this coming back to the Father's love, coming back to he loves me just as I am and he has not rejected me, and relearning how to accept his love and that I'm not rejected. That was what stood out the most for me, was coming back to the Father's heart and accepting that he loves me just as I am, and I don't have to do anything in order for me to be loved. And that kind of helped me then ease into other areas of rejection that I needed to deal with. Why am I feeling rejected? What are the triggers for me, in feeling rejected, and how can I handle that? Mm-hmm.
When it comes to your father, passing away so young in your life, how long did it take for you to realize how much that can affect someone, how much that affected you? What pattern did you awaken to go, okay, I've got to deal with this?
I think for me, it came a lot with my dating life. So when I was younger, I lost him when I was really young. And, you go through these phases of grief, especially when you're a child. You don't know how to express your grief. So I think it took me a long time to get to a point where I accepted that he was gone. I accepted that it wasn't my fault in some way that he had died. But then I found that the kind of men that I was choosing to date were people that I thought a father figure should be, right? So they were a little bit authoritarian. I was depending on them a lot more than I needed to, because I was missing that one man in my life that I could depend on as a father. But then I was transferring all of that love and that need to this person that I was dating. And I think that was... It's not a right thing to do, because I'm expecting so much from them, and I'm leaving myself vulnerable to hurt because I am expecting so much. I am wanting to be completed by them. And so I think it took like dating 2 or 3 guys where I thought, oh, okay, actually, I'm dating the same kind of person. And what is the need inside of me that makes me want this kind of person? Would it have something to do with the fact that I didn't grow up with a father? Does it have something to do with the fact that the only man that was in my life was my older brother? and he did his best to be an example, but he still was not my father. And my mother did her best to be both mother and father to me. But yeah, there is nothing like a missing father in a family. We all need father figures, and God is our father. But if we don't deal with that wound, it's detrimental to different areas of your life. So for me, it was looking at my dating pattern. I think that was the starkest thing for me that I can think of. I'm sure that there were many areas that were affected, but it's the way that I was choosing the men that I dated that made me think, actually, there should be something wrong here.
It's funny because that's exactly what God used to awaken my life, because the relational patterns that I had where I realized, yeah, something isn't something isn't right here. And it's not, and it's, at first you can kind of like throw it onto all the other people, and maybe there's something wrong with them. And then after a while you're kind of like, something needs to change within me. Do you think that that's maybe the best area that God can use with the upcoming generation, with the younger generation of people, to awaken their need for healing, is to see like, wow, my romantic relationship is, my patterns in that and finding a spouse are really distorted or dysfunctional or having a lot of struggles. And also how I relate, even just in friendships around me. Like you mentioned the friend canceling, and how it would kind of go like right down to a deep place in your heart, communicating rejection. Like, why can't I seem to just put that in a more balanced place, And I think that I find it with people in that are younger than me that I'm trying to help, we can tend to look at ourselves as a little bit more invincible, of like, you see something and you kind of go, oh yeah, I'll just stay busy. I'll have to figure that out later. But I'm praying and I'm seeing more and more awakening of, hey, wait a second. I need to deal with this stuff. I'm finding some younger age people even contacting me for personal sessions where they're like, yeah, I've got, this career I'm pursuing, and I'm realizing, wow, I've got a lot of stuff in how I see myself that's not healthy. Or they're going, yeah, I'm dating, and there's some stuff coming up. I'm seeing it now. So it's giving me a lot of encouragement. Do you feel the same about the generation to come, your generation, and even younger generations, where there may be an awakening of, we need to deal with these issues? They're asking more questions and they're searching a little bit deeper. Do you find that, or do you find that it's just really challenging to get to some of those heart subjects?
I think that it comes from the relationships also, because there's such a lack of relationships now. I think a lot of young people are really lonely. Even though we have social media, we may have 7,000 followers, we're still alone. And unfortunately, we have not been able to successfully speak to our parents and ask them how they related with each other, right? The generation before us doesn't seem to be so good at talking about their emotions and what they went through. So we're kind of just fumbling in the dark, trying to find out, what can I do? Who do I talk to? And we're also the generation that has been, I think, the most open about what our psychological problems are, what our emotional problems are. Now you can, talk to a therapist online. You don't have to go into a therapist's office anymore. There's, counseling. People are pouring their hearts out on social media. So we're very open to talk about our feelings, but we have nobody right next to us to talk to. And also, we're now thinking, is this all there is to relationships? The dating landscape has changed. Before, you met Susie in a bar. Now you meet Susie on an app, and things are moving very fast. So it's very hard for us to adapt and to be comfortable where we are. And we realize that there's a shortfall and we don't know what to do about it. So yes, relationships, I think, is what God is going to use to unearth the fact that there is a lot of rejection there. Rejection from our parents, rejection from our friends, how we're not dealing with it. There's something wrong. Why, even if it's easier now to meet somebody on an app, why can't we take things further? Or why is this my fourth marriage? This question. I think relationships are going to be the big thing, because the world is changing. Everything's becoming more technological. So we're going to have machines doing everything for us, right? Now everybody has Alexa, play music. Alexa, do this. But Alexa doesn't have any emotions. And so now we're not concentrating on getting stuff done with our hands because we have machines that can do it. But machines don't have emotions, and machines right now cannot teach us a lot about emotions. We still have to talk to each other. And we're having difficulty doing that. So yes, relationships on the job, with our families, with our boyfriend, girlfriend, spouses, that is what I think God is going to use to heal many of us.
I'm fascinated about people's background and culture. So, for example, and I mentioned this to you in one of our previous conversations, my background has a mix of Scandinavian, where my mom's side is Norwegian, Scandinavian, Swedish, and my father's side being Puerto Rican with a Spanish background. I have a mixture of that inside. And both cultures from my mom and dad, they deal with issues of the heart very, very differently, and they have their own patterns of dysfunction that I had to maneuver through. Scandinavians can tend to really suppress and not deal with emotional things. I hate to just generalize, but there's just some patterns that that are there of you kind of just get over it, go back to work, and then my father's side and their background, there can be a lot of emotional pain that kind of goes in a lot of dysfunctional places and dysfunctional directions. Then the understanding of the Father's love and his presence and value is a very foreign subject, and there's a lot of brokenness in that. And then grieving and processing through, like you said, those issues of feelings and how do you feel and how that make you feel. It's like an unknown concept. Is there anything unique in your cultural background that you can share that you had to work through to begin to let God heal your heart at a whole new level?
I think it's confrontation. So in Zambia, I mean, people express them, they can express their emotions. We love to sing. Singing in church is fantastic. We like to show our emotions about happiness, grief. If there's a funeral, people openly grieving. It's about letting out all of those feelings all at once. But we're also a very polite culture. You cannot confront someone about something that they've done. If they're late, you kind of laugh it off. If somebody's doing something that you don't like, you can kind of pull them aside to talk to them. But even then, you're not really direct about it. I compare this with the German way of life, which is very, very direct. Things need to get done. You didn't show up. Why isn't your work done? This kind of stuff. But confrontation was what was keeping me from going there because it was uncomfortable. If I am unable to confront somebody in my culture about something wrong that they've done, then I'm unable to confront myself and my feelings because it just feels so foreign. Right? It just feels like we should just kind of smooth it out and everything will be fine and don't worry about it. So being able to confront my feelings is something that I had to learn how to do. I had to go against my culture of not confronting other people and not confronting my own feelings and confronting my feelings and saying, God, you know what, there's something wrong here. Could you please heal me? But then again, the openness of, being Zambian or being African, where you can express yourself, you can express your joy, was what was freeing for me when I finally confronted my feelings and I could go to God and say, God, you made me this way. God, I'm happy to talk to you. God, I'm sad and I can cry and really open up and let those, emotions flow, which I think a lot of cultures don't have, right? I think it's hard for cultures that are really closed in to, for example, go to church and just bust out dancing, the way we dance at church in Zambia. God made us all different, and we are all dealing with different things, and that's why we react the way we react. So I had to learn how to confront, which is go against my culture, but then again, use my culture, the exuberance, the joy, the grief, and how I can express it freely and express that to God as well and know that he accepts me and he's not afraid of my questions. He's not afraid of my anger. He's not afraid of my excitement. He made me this way and he can take it.
So this is awesome. So as you're learning to confront those things inside of you, I'm assuming it really enhanced relationships around you and conversations. I get the impression you're rising, you're elevating the standard and quality of relationship interaction that you're drawing up. Did people respond to that well, or was it like, oh no, tea time with Twaambo, I don't know if I can handle this?
I think that it's gotten a lot better, especially when I talk to people from back home, from Zambia, where you can't really have a confrontational conversation, where you can't pinpoint and say, hey, Mark, actually, this is where you went wrong, and this is what you can do to improve it. It's gotten much better, especially with my family members. Before it was like, oh, here she comes, and now she wants to talk about feelings, and why can't she just let everything go? Like, we've been fine all this time. Why do we have to lay our feelings out on the table? But now it's like, yeah, okay, actually, maybe you're right. Maybe I am reacting this way because of this issue. And I think that it's changing so much. Even in Zambia, people are talking about their feelings because they don't want things to stay the same. And so, yeah, it's gotten a lot better. And sometimes I think, even with Tea Time with Twaambo, am I talking about feelings too much, right? Like, are people tired of it? But I get, messages here and there where people say, hey, like, your podcast has been really helpful in helping me be more self-aware and to find out where things are coming from. And, thank you for that. So these are conversations that need to be had. It's uncomfortable, but we have to go there.
Right. And it's uncomfortable because people are so unfamiliar with it. They don't have any references, because once you engage it, it's not that scary. It's wonderful, but it's like all that pain they suppress. They don't know what to do with it. There's no references. So It's like, I think, keep talking about emotions, keep bringing that up, because it's such a foreign subject, and we need more discipleship. And how do we process emotions in a healthy way? How can we learn, to walk through them in a way that's fruitful, And it's always interesting because in every family, there's often one person that kind of rises up in a way of like wanting generational change.
Right.
A lot of times it's the firstborn, but not always. And it can really rock the boat because the default setting of the family is just keep things the way they are, right? We always want to move towards comfort as much as possible, get out of this, like, any discomfort in any way. I don't want to deal with those things, and because then it means I'm blaming myself, and it means I wasn't good enough, and I made too many mistakes, and I don't want to deal with that. And it's like, no, this is about healing and restoration. And I think that there is something to be said about somebody in the family that says, hey, no, I want to invite us to have real relationship. What over, and you don't have to get into like intense details, but what overall has been some of the response in the family towards you going, hey, I want to either go deeper or see our family improve? What have been some of the good responses, and what have been some of the challenges you see, and even other people that you watch maneuvering through their family dynamics?
I think the challenges are people feeling blamed for something, right? If you bring up and say, hey, when that happened, I felt this way, usually the person will hear, this is what you did to me. And also, we are not so good at expressing our emotions where the other person doesn't feel that way, right? If somebody says, when we went to the mall, I felt that you spent more money on my sister than you spent on me. That could be misheard as you always spend money on my sister and not on me. And so one of the greatest challenges has been putting the message across where the person doesn't feel that they're blamed and it's their fault and that they have to do something to fix it. It's about just me expressing that this is how I felt, this is how I perceived it. Because as you have spoken about on your podcast, we have these agreements that we've made. They're in our minds. We have these filters. So we enter these situations with these preconceived filters, and we see things with these filters on, and it may not be that way. And then it's hard to just explain to somebody, this is how I felt. This is how it looked like with my filters. And then that person receives the message with their filters on, right? Oh, this is what you're saying to me. How dare you? How could you? So those are the challenges, was just get into a place where there's no blame when you talk about feelings. You just say, hey, this is how I feel. How did you feel? Is this right that we both felt this way? Was this exactly what happened? And what can we do about it? And the pleasant things have been just hearing where people's hearts are, hearing how tender their own hearts are, and what makes them happy, and how they also wanted healing, and how having these conversations have brought healing to them as well in parts that you may not have started talking about. You start talking about exercising and you end up talking about money, and then it's healing all around. So the conversations have pleasantly led to healing in many areas where you never thought that the healing was taking place.
What you talk about with communication, with your filter talking, and then they're hearing through their filter, that explains really well what I try to communicate about the rejection mindset, which is that our filter gets messed up, and so we're hearing things that are not even being said. We're constantly doing that, and then it ruins relationships. You talked about agreements. What kind of agreements did you realize were rejection based that you had to start recognizing and dealing with?
The major one was that I had to go above and beyond to keep people in my life, because if I didn't, then they would reject me. Right? So it was about like, if I'm not extra nice, if I'm not available, they're going to reject me as I am as a person. So I have to do all of this extra stuff to keep them. So it was about me feeling just rejected as a person, as a whole person. So in order for me to be accepted, let me be a little extra. Let me buy a little gift. Let me always be available 24/7 on the phone. Just these little things that may not seem, like it's a big thing, but they're taxing to a person, because you can't be there for people 24/7 and not be there for yourself as well. So my own cup was running empty, trying to keep everybody happy and being worried that they're going to reject me. And so that's what I did. I basically went above and beyond to keep from people rejecting me. But that was just my whole filter. Like I came in expecting to be rejected, right? I had the rejection agreement within me. I was ready to be rejected. And to defend myself from that, I was doing more, but it still happened anyway.
Wow. That's very well explained.
Yeah.
So as you're recognizing these agreements, you'd mentioned you're married, you have a young one. Tell me about how breaking free of a rejection mindset has enhanced married life and helped you even in your lens as a parent.
So first of all, so Marco, my husband, is very, very different from all the men that I had dated before. And it was nice that he came in when I was working on myself, when I was doing this healing. And I think that that's why I was able to meet somebody that's very different from people that I had dated before, because this part of me had been healed. But it's a conversation that we've had to continuously have, because even though I've broken those agreements, even though, I'm doing the work, it's a continual thing, because I have my filters and he has his own rejection filters, right? So now we're having to deal with both. And because we are married, it's our issue to deal with. It's not more about, well, I'm fine and you have your rejection stuff. So, let's just, you deal with you and I deal with me. It's like, no, how are we going to deal with this together? And it's been good because we have learned how to figure out what our triggers are. I know what triggers me and he knows what triggers him, and I know what triggers him, and vice versa. And so it's helped us where if we have a little bit of conflict that comes from rejection, right? If he doesn't do something that I expect him to do and I go off on a tangent, I can be able to rein myself in and be like, whoa, 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 where is this coming from? Is this the rejection thing again? Do you need to go there and work on it? Is this true, what you think he's saying? And maybe just like, talking to him about it and praying about it again together, is saying, actually, this is not true. This is a lie from the enemy. I'm not rejecting you. Maybe you just didn't hear it correctly. And also with the little one, it's been interesting to, after I've read all these articles about different ways that even children feel rejection from such a young age, to kind of be there 100%. I'm present in her presence, and just being conscious of like, okay, how much time am I spending on my phone or on the computer? Because I can see that she looks back at me to see if I'm paying attention to her, and I'm like, okay, I'm still here. So it's helped me in my parenting and being more aware of, could this result in rejection issues with the child? And not so much that I want to coddle her and, never have her face any form of rejection, but I want to be present and know that I'm doing as much as I can to make sure that I'm leading her in the right direction. And also when she's older, be able to talk about the fact that there will be sometimes some things in her lives, people that she will deal with, but this is the correct way to go about it, to deal with it.
That's really good. I want to ask you another question and get your opinion on this, because when I talk about exposing the rejection mindset, there's a lot of people that are unaware of the rejection root issue in their life and the various layers of it. And they kind of, and I'm sure you've seen this too, they can kind of shrug it up. No, I haven't really been rejected that bad, they'll say.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, no, I don't think that's really an issue. And
Yeah.
I find that I have to do a lot of explaining to, and then I just kind of go, you know what, God, you'll just have to show people. and when they're ready, they're ready. What kind of impressions do you find in talking to people that are some of the statements they say or some of the mindsets they have that keep them from even investigating this subject in their life?
So one thing I could say is from, coming from Zambia, right? Mental health issues are not widely spoken about. They're spoken about more and more now, but there still is a little bit of a stigma to somebody that would be considered to have a mental health problem. And when you start to talk about rejection, it may come out like you're calling the person crazy, right? Or I don't know if you've ever heard the term, I can't be depressed, I'm African. I don't know if you've ever heard this term.
Yeah, it seems like that fits in a lot of cultures. I can't be depressed, I'm
Exactly.
fill in the blank.
I'm so and so. So as a culture can reject the fact that they have rejection issues. And then there's people that also feel they're too privileged to have rejection issues. I know I wasn't rejected, because I was never abused or I never lost a parent or nothing that bad happened to me. So there's no way that I could have these issues, So there's just this denial on a cultural level. There's a denial because you grew up in a normal home. You had a mom and a dad and you went to a good school and you always had food on the table and you went, you had extracurricular activities, but you don't know why you're still feeling empty. You don't know why you still you don't have a partner. You grew up in a wealthy home and you think that the problems that you're having now should be for people that did not grow up in a wealthy home. And you're afraid of exploring and saying, hey, actually, maybe the problem is inside of me. And you're just thinking, okay, let me just jump on to the next thing, the next project, the next vacation. I should really just be grateful. I should buy a gratitude journal and write more about what I'm thankful for. So a lot of it is just denial because you feel your circumstances are too good for you to have been rejected or have this issue in your life, or that your culture just doesn't happen where you come from.
So talk to me about a very difficult subject that I'd like your opinion, your perspective on, because when it comes to rejection, it happens, we have it on an individual level. And from my opinion and perspective, if you've not been loved in who you are and learn identity out of that, rejection is all over that. The mindset just starts building even from a young age. And then we pass this on culturally, and then cultures begin to have conflict against each other. So we've seen this all the way since the beginning of time, of the clashing of countries and nations and cultures. And we see this even in systemic cultural patterns of racism and how races deal with each other. And I see the rejection mindset playing so much in it because it never really allows healing to happen, because if I've been hurt, if a rejection mind gets in that, the hurt kind of just keeps cycling through different stages, and I never get to a place where I can heal with you. What are some of the things that you feel culturally that race relations has been impacted by rejection? And what are some thoughts about how the healing could possibly happen more in people's lives?
So I think, especially when you talk about race relations, it's usually talked about from an American perspective. You have Black Americans, you have white Americans. I come from Zambia, and the race relations there come from tension between Africans and, for example, Zambia was it was a British colony. So you have the British people that were there, and then you have the ancestors of the people that were British. They're Zambia now, but they lived there. And you still get this mindset where you think that somebody that is white is better than you are, because that is how racism works, right? You make one race seem better than another race. And this has affected people in Zambia. It affected me. I mean, I went to a school, I went to school with British kids, and I can remember a little bit in the difference in how I would treat like white kids at my school and how I would play with Zambian kids. There was always this wonder and awe, about the white kids, because I didn't have any white kids in my neighborhood, but they were also placed a little bit on a pedestal, and almost like you can do no wrong, this kind of thing. So there is, a little bit of tension there, because it feels like British people that came to Zambia, they had most of the land, their kids went to better schools, this kind of thing. So the tension there is, I wouldn't say it's as much as you see in the States, but it's definitely there. I'm sure you've heard about land grabbing in Zimbabwe, this kind of thing. The Africans want their land back. And if there's to be healing there, I think there has to be an admittance on the part of the ancestors of the British people saying, okay, what happened was wrong, and what can we do to make it right? This is the feeling, on the African side, is maybe I don't even want the land back. I just want you to acknowledge that what happened was wrong. There has to be an acknowledgement from the other side. In terms of, the race situation in the US, you have, the Black people in America that came as a result of slavery, right? And then you have this rejection mindset that has come in generation to generation to generation. You cannot get a job because you're Black, or you cannot get a job because of the hairstyle that you have. All of these disparities where there is no trust at all. There's completely no trust. And you go around with this rejection mindset because you are expecting to be rejected, right? You've heard that Tommy down the street got rejected because he had his hair in cornrows, and that he was Black. And so for you go around thinking, hey, I'm going to be rejected too because, Tommy got rejected. And I think it's a complicated story. And it's in terms of like healing the rejection there, I think there has to be a conversation, and there has to be some give and take, on both ends. I think that white people have to educate themselves more on what it's like to be a Black person in America. What is it like to be an African in Zambia? What are Black people going through? What are their schools like? Where do they live? Why is it the way that it is? And then on the side of the Black people, we are going to have to learn to be more trusting and think, okay, it's not all their fault that they were born where they were born, and they have the privilege that they have. And sometimes we just want empathy and the understanding of like, okay, I see you, I hear you, and you matter. I may not understand, but I'm going to do what I can to find out more, to understand.
That's really powerful. And I think that what you mentioned about the exchange is so important, about the finding, the coming together. I love this passage of scripture where God even says it with us. He says, come now, let us reason together. And right. I think that's the ultimate goal of reconciliation, is how can we come and bring reasoning. And I think that what happens is when we come to the table, there's hurt and defense mechanisms,
right.
So it's like, let's go back to the picture of going to our parents, right? Mm-hmm. It's very difficult to talk about how their parenting affected us, because they will immediately go into defense mechanisms about what they were going through, and you don't understand. And I was going through a lot, and I tried to do my best, and I'm a good parent. And you're like, wait, stop. And it's not going anywhere. I feel like it kind of goes back to what you're saying earlier about learning to have conversations with people that are healing, that create a safe environment, because both the person that had an effect on unleashing rejection needs to recognize, and the person receiving will have to at some point go, all right, I'm gonna let down my dodgeball, and I'm gonna stop throwing the ammunition back, right? Because otherwise we won't. So I look at it like from a familial perspective of like the older generation to the younger generation has to posture in a way that says, I want to share this. This is what's going on. I need you to just hear me. Can we talk?
Yeah.
and talk about it in an honoring way. And
Mm-hmm.
in it, can we both, because all of it comes down to like these wars that kick up and strife that we have to be
Yeah.
willing to go, all right, I'm going to put my hatchet down and
Yeah.
and be willing to let go of my ammunition and listen. I find for me, it shows me a lot. It teaches me a lot. It enhances my relationship. And I think that my concern culturally is the wound of rejection. It's taken over so much that it's like the battles and the arguments have gotten to the point where it's like we don't even at times even know what we're fighting about anymore.
Yeah.
It's like in couples, they'll any married couple will admit to this. They get to an argument where they don't even realize what they're arguing about anymore. But it started with a rejection wound that went into this dodgeball match that eventually went into these intense places. And I'm not trying to solve things by just simple statements, but I think that I feel, and you tell me what you think, I feel if we can in our relational circle learn to be safe people that can listen, learn, understand people's battlegrounds, and be a safe place for them to grow and be encouraged to grow, even beyond your own typical cultural niche. We all have our like leanings where our groups we hang out with and all that.
Yeah.
It's fine, but that there's an openness, understanding of, like you said, of a learning to ultimately get to the place of let's reason together and understand. That I don't know what I don't know what it's like to live in your shoes. You don't know what it's like to live in mine, and I'm not going to claim to, but let's create a safe place where we can understand each other. I'm not your enemy. You're not my enemy. How can we get there?
Yeah. Yeah. I think as speaking from a Black perspective, it'll take white people really going there and learning about what it's like, because you get people that I see people ask on social media or on websites or in articles, what is it really like or what really happened? And you have to look at it from our perspective that even when you learn history in school, you learn about the white history, right? And I remember growing up in Zambia, we learned that David Livingstone he first discovered the Victoria Falls, which is in Zambia. And this was the narrative for a long time. But like, what about the Africans that lived there before he came as an explorer? Like, did they not see the Victoria Falls? And so it's a relearning because we're also having to relearn our own culture and our own history because it's been whitewashed for so long. And so the feeling is that, okay, please put a little bit more extra effort in getting to know us as we are. And then it will feel safe because if you can come to me and say, hey, Twaambo, I read about Zambia that this, and this, is that true for you? Then I can feel like, oh, okay, well, he actually looked into it and he's interested, as opposed to questions like, so I hear that you eat hot food in Africa. Is that true? Actually, yes, but I'm from the southern part of Africa and we don't really like hot food, So there has to be less of a generalization and more of a learning. And yes, safe spaces where you're allowed to talk about your discontent and not to have other people feel like you're just being flippant or you're, trying to be a victim yet again. Like, sit, listen, and listen to the pain without reacting in any way. Be empathetic. And then people just need to get it off their chest and hear that you understand. And then the healing then can continue because there really is a huge rejection wound there. And you're right. People argue. You don't even know what you're arguing about, but everybody just wants to be heard because white people also want to be heard, right? Maybe they don't know how to say, actually, it's awkward for me to go ahead and, find out what's going on in your country because I might offend you. I don't know how to go about it. But that's exactly what we want you to say is, hey, I don't know how to go about it. Can you help me? Or this is what I read. Can I talk to you about it? Pull me to the side and say, hey, I read this in a book and I don't know how to approach it. What do you think? As opposed to just jumping on and be like, well, this is what I found, So that's where we are. We need to acknowledge that we both want to be heard. The conflict in any relationship is about being understood and being heard. And I think that's where this rejection wound can start to be healed if there's just talk and if you can hear the other person.
Yeah, that's really good. And it leads me to another question, which has to do with generational healing in the sense of, as each generation progresses, I believe God's calling us to a deeper level of healing and what we're responsible for, dealing with and letting God set us free from. What do you find are some of the aspects that you could encourage those that are younger than you that are some mindsets that need to shift in order for us to move in a healthier generation, healthier next direction?
I think we need to look back to our parents and our grandparents and realize that they may not communicate and articulate their feelings the way we would want to or the way we do to each other, but we have to meet them where they are because there's so many things that they know that could help you with your future. There's so many things that they know that happened to them that they could explain about why your father acted the way he acted or your grandmother acted the way she acted. That would help you think, maybe that's why I grew up in a home where nobody was saying anything. It actually wasn't me. It comes from 2 generations back where this, he was in the war and this, and, it continues on. So our healing can start from us talking to our parents and our grandparents and finding out what happened. So we have to be open to what has happened in the past in order for us to move forward. We're going to have to keep having these conversations because I feel that we're shutting our parents and our grandparents out because we think they just don't get it. They're hardcore anyway, and they never talk to anybody, and all they want to do is do this and that. But I would encourage young people, if we're going to have this generational healing, talk to your parents and your grandparents. Find out from them, how did they grow up, right? They're acting the way they're acting because of the way they grew up in their home. Why does grandma not talk? Then you find out, maybe she had somebody abused her in her home. Maybe she finally needs somebody to talk to, and you can bring healing to her, and it brings healing to you because now you know that your mother acted that way because grandma, it's a whole, it adds together. Yeah.
That's really wise. In fact, when I was pastoring the last church that my wife and I had pastored, we found this over and over again where there'd be like a certain person in the church that would manifest maybe certain annoying behaviors. And you would get like sometime this little bit of like a feedback from people of like, why does this person keep doing this? And it was interesting because my wife and I often knew these people and their story. We knew what they've been through. We sat down with them, did some, some coaching and prayer work with them. And when you know their story, a lot of what they manifest, it makes sense. It's I'm not saying that, that we should never try to, get those areas healed and changed, but it's like, it gives you a compassion to, and I think in what you're talking about, it helps elevate our understanding of honor in a way of honoring what we did receive, but yet also recognizing why some of the other patterns happened the way that they did. And we don't have to live in denial that those things happened, but putting it in the context of honor so that then I can move in my generation to go, okay, God, how can I begin? Because I feel like if we have dishonor, then we end up either repeating the same patterns or we go into an opposite ditch that's now a whole new set of problems. So I find that exposing the rejection mindset is a passionate subject for me because it started with me. People say, well, why do you know so much about it? Well, because I was chock full of it. And I think that that was one of the things that I learned is that I have to see the wounds in my life and realize that the healing of those wounds will not ultimately be found in me getting that person to finally be what I needed them to be, right? Like I can't go, well, my dad didn't do this, my mom didn't do this, and if they would just get that, then finally I can be healed. That actually feeds rejection because then it's like, I need them to be this for me. Or that friend, if they'd stop ignoring me, or if people would stop doing this, now we're leading to like insanity. I have to realize I can only find that in God.
Yeah.
So then it causes me to then, if I don't have an intense expectation for you to be something for me, then I'm going to be more open, more loving, more understanding when we interact. You know what I mean? But if I'm holding you to something that's tied to a wound, man, there's always going to be a negative outcome to the relationship.
And I think the difficulty that young people are having is the experience that we've had in the church, right? People have been rejected in the church, or people have grown up I grew up in the church, and I didn't accept God's love the way that I should have. Because, yeah, you pray to God, you know that He's your Father, but you never really accept Him as your Father who loves you as you are, because it's performance based, because your home is probably performance based, your friendships are performance based, so then you have that filter towards God as well. And I think the difficulty is young people don't know how to practically find that healing for that wound, right? Like you said, you're expecting other people to change, but that's not the answer. You have to change. So then what does a young person have to do to go to God to get this healing? And that's why I like your podcast, is that you give lots of practical advice on what a young person can do. Identify what the agreements are that you've made, right? Break those agreements. Talk to God about you accepting Him as your Father. Talk to Him the way you would, to a friend, and say, hey, God, actually, it's a little bit hard for me to accept that you're my Father. It's hard for me to accept that you exist. Like, can you show me? He's not afraid of that. People are afraid of asking Him because they think that God's going to be like, well, I don't know how I can show you. No, He can take your questions. And I think that people should get your book because it practically shows you, hey, this is how you can deal with this wound. It's not just some far-fetched, open the Bible, read a chapter a day, and it'll go away. No, it takes you actually doing some hard work, identifying what's going on in your mind, talking to God about it. He's open. He's the healer. He's your Father. You think about when Adam and Eve were in the garden, right? He came and spoke to them every evening. They were just chilling and talking. What did they talk about? Who knows? Flowers, animals, stars. But it was just conversation, and He wants that with us as well.
I can't say it better. That's really, really powerful. And I really appreciate your time, Twaambo. And is there anything else regarding, the rejection mindset that I didn't ask that you feel is important to share, or do you feel like we were able to kind of at least get an initial summary of some of the talking points from your heart?
Yeah, I think we got into it. I think that identifying the agreements, maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, how sneaky they can be, because I found that for me, you don't make an agreement coming out like, well, now I'm going to make this agreement. It just happens where you bump into somebody's shoulder as you're walking down the street and you think, oh, nobody ever makes any room for me. And then from then on, nobody ever makes room for you. Maybe you could just expound a little bit on that before we have to go.
Yeah. And I think that that's the key to breaking through rejection, because our agreements, they come up a lot. And, the one that I had for a long time that still pops up is in situations, people aren't listening to you. And that's interesting that the enemy would utilize that wound, because God's given me a voice and He's used me and He's called me to be a mouthpiece to help people's hearts to be awakened and healed. So if I'm dealing with the interfering belief that no one's listening, or people aren't paying attention, or they're not getting it, or they don't care, or something like that, it's very disempowering to my faith. And so, well, how did I pick that up? Well, you have a few disappointments or a few interactions that someone doesn't seem like they're listening. And if you grow up with any experience like that, you get used to it. And what happens is we develop these mindsets that we then portray on the world. And they're usually themes. And someone can find their rejection themes usually by saying, it always seems to me that blank happens to me. It always seems to be that I, kind of like finishing that sentence. People don't listen to me. I get the short end of the stick, that I never get breakthrough. Good stuff doesn't happen to me. I never have good relationships. The burden is always on me. I have to always fix things. I'm only loved when I do things well. I have to fix people's problems. I have to be the grown-up in the family, or that's just the beginning.
Go on. Yeah.
Right. And if you can identify that, what's kind of the theme that you bump into? When's the best time to identify it? When you run into a problem in life. So you have a bad day, something doesn't go well at work, you're going through a hard financial time. What's the thing that pops up? What's the statement that comes up that's looking for reinforcement? You know, financial hardship comes. You're like, this always happens to me. Yeah. There you go. The victim mindset that's saying bad things happen to me and I'm a magnet for bad things. So then you look for that. It sounds distorted, but that's how we operate. We will look for that which we agree with because we've become used to it, familiar with it, comfortable with it. So then we project that. And here's the thing, that it does happen. If you keep flowing in this belief system, you're going to find yourself moving more and more to it. So breaking the agreement is it starts internal, but then it needs to be practiced externally, where now I start breaking the patterns that keep me going. So for example, if I'm a single person and I say, I'm looking for a great relationship with a female, but every woman that I date is a controlling, manipulated, crazy woman, right? And I just start taking those wounds and applying that, then I'm never going to be able to find the relationship I'm looking for,
right? Yeah.
Because I'm always focused on that, and we tend to look for, find, and even be attracted to the junk that we carry. So even I hear in your story where there had to be an intentional mindset. Here's a pattern. I'm agreeing with it. It's flowing. It's comfortable, and I got to break out of this. I got to break into what's healthier and learn what that means. So the agreements come about very subtle. It usually starts with like a feeling, like you're a little kid and you kind of go, "No one wants to play ball with me." Everybody has that experience, right? But if you have enough of those, they start to tie together. And the enemy knows that your brain looks for patterns, right? You don't have enough time to compute all these things. It simplifies it into patterns. And so if you create a pattern of lumping people up in certain categories or creating these limited stories, now you feel safe. Okay, right. I never break free, so at least I know that's my thing. That's where I'm at because I never break free. Nothing good ever happens to me. And anytime the slightest negative thing happens, you go, see, there it is. There it is. And so I think that's, when Jesus said, as your faith is, as you believe, as your faith is, so will it be. I think it can really apply to what's the dominant narrative in my life. It doesn't mean that everything that bad happens to me happens because I believed it was going to happen. I don't follow that train of thought. But it's like when there's an overall pattern over and over again, it's really important to go, it's one thing that you were abused or you were victimized or you had something bad, but that no longer has to be your identity. Invite God in to heal that, to heal those areas. And then now what? You can go through a time of sickness. It doesn't mean that your identity is sickness. You can have a mental health issue. It doesn't mean that mental health issue is your identity. And that's where I like to help people to understand who they really are, to shed off those mindsets that keep just limiting them. They just cap them down. And most of my coaching calls and things is like seeing those limiting factors. In fact, in my book, Exposing the Rejection Mindset, there is a chapter, I believe it's chapter 4, dedicated just to the rejection cycle of limitation. And I talk about 10 aspects of how rejection will keep a cycle of limitation, and you won't even realize it. You just kind of stay in it, and never break free. So I've realized over the years, even recently, God uncovered some more through some interactions I had that like, wow, that's a really bad story I've been listening to. And it was like really subtle, and it was keeping me limited in that area of my life. So exposing the rejection mindset sets you on a journey of like layer after layer, because God knows we can't handle it all coming off at once. He knows
Right.
that.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that he's very systematic with us and relationship oriented journey and process. We're going to go on a road together and you're going to discover. What encourages me is hearing somebody like you who's having these internal awakenings. And it encourages me that more and more in our generation and generations to come are awakening to the healing work that God can do to our hearts. And you're right. It starts right in our relationship. God is using our relationships as the incubator and the laboratory of where he wants to work on us the most. And so
Yeah.
I'm really encouraged. I thank you. I can't thank you enough for your time. Look forward to more conversations. Please tell those who are watching or listening where they could hear more about what you're doing. How can they connect with what you're doing? And what's the latest thing that you're up to right now?
Okay, so they can find me on my website, www.teatimewithtwaambo.com. And also my podcast is called Tea Time with Twaambo. And I'm on there every week, talk about different things. And that is what I'm working on the most. I'm also working on a few online courses that could help, people that are listening be more self-aware, to work on agreements. And it's mostly I'm in the learning process. I'm still, like you said, it's a journey. And I'm taking this journey with the people that listen to the podcast, and which is why listening to your podcast is very, very important, because your podcast helps me unearth these different parts of me that I never thought of, whether it's just inside of me or if it's relational, because you talk about relationships on your podcast as well with your wife. And it's great to go into it and be like, actually, I never thought about that. And could this be, something that's happening? So I'm going on this journey. And my listeners are going with me. So if anybody wants to join me on this journey, just Google Tea Time with Twaambo and we can take this journey together.
That's awesome. And I'll put it in some links in the notes too, underneath the video, and people can be able to access that. Twaambo, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.